When I was 4 or 5 years old, my dad took my sister and me to a massive toy store to pick out a birthday present for one of my friends. My sister, 2 years older than me, was around 6 at the time. The store was a sprawling wonderland of shelves packed with toys, bright lights, and endless possibilities. A kid's paradise. My dad and I were in the Lego aisle, poring over the sets on display. I was completely engrossed, my eyes glued to the box of a castle set, its towers and drawbridges calling to me. I remember wishing it was my birthday coming up so I could beg for that set. My dad, holding another Lego box, seemed just as captivated, maybe secretly wishing the same thing. Meanwhile, my sister was restless, shuffling around the aisle, bored out of her mind with our slow deliberation. At some point, she wandered off. I didn't notice at first, too caught up in the fantasy of building that castle. But then she came back, tugging urgently at my dad's arm. "What is it, sweetheart?" he asked, his eyes still fixed on the box in his hands, his tone casual, distracted. "There's a man." "Oh, never mind, he's gone now," she said, her voice trailing off. That got his attention. My dad's head snapped toward her, and he set the box back on the shelf with a soft thud. "What man?" he asked, his voice sharper now, tinged with concern. My sister hesitated, then explained. "There was a man who asked if I want to come see his puppy. I told him I have to ask you first, but I don't know where he went." The air shifted. My dad's face hardened, and he didn't hesitate. He took the Lego box from my hands, placed it back on the shelf, and grabbed my hand firmly. His other arm went around my sister's shoulders, pulling her close. "Well, let's go find him," he said, his voice loud and resolute, almost too cheerful, like he was trying to mask something darker. He started leading us toward the checkouts and the exit, his steps quick and purposeful. Now, this toy store wasn't just big. It was enormous, a labyrinth of aisles and displays that seemed to stretch forever. We were moving fast now, my short legs struggling to keep up with my dad's long strides. My sister clung to his side, her earlier boredom replaced by something quieter, more uncertain. As we neared the checkouts, she suddenly pointed toward a man who was just about to slip out the store's glass doors. "That's him," she said, her voice small but certain. I followed her gaze. Even from behind, I could see why she recognized him. His hair was long, cascading halfway down his back in a dark, stringy curtain. He wore a heavy black winter coat, which struck me as odd because it was a warm day, the kind where you'd expect t-shirts and shorts, not bulky outerwear. My dad's grip on my hand tightened, and we sped up, weaving through the crowded checkout area until we reached the nearest cashier. "Stay here with this nice lady for a sec," my dad said to us, nodding toward the cashier, a middle-aged woman with a kind smile who looked a little confused but nodded back. Then he took off, his footsteps heavy and determined. I watched as he closed the distance to the man, who was almost out the door. My dad's hand slammed down on a guy's shoulder with force I could hear even from where I stood, a sharp, resounding smack. He spun the man around to face him, and then he started yelling, "Where's the puppy?" "Huh? Where's the puppy you wanted to show my daughter?" His voice boomed, cutting through the hum of the store. People around us, shoppers, other cashiers, turned to stare, their eyes wide at the commotion. My dad didn't let up. "You wanted to take my daughter to see your puppy? Where is it? I want to see the puppy too." The man was stammering, his words tripping over each other, incoherent. He tried to pull away, but my dad's grip on his shoulder was ironclad, pinning him in place. The guy's long hair swung as he squirmed, his face pale and panicked under the fluorescent lights. My dad's voice grew louder, angrier. Turning his head toward us, he shouted, "Is this the guy who asked you to come see his puppy?" My sister, standing next to me by the cashier, nodded silently, her eyes dropping to her shoes. I could tell she was scared, maybe thinking she was in trouble. I didn't blame her. Our dad was yelling so loudly it felt like the whole store was shaking. She looked small, her shoulders hunched, her fingers twisting nervously. My dad turned back to the man, his voice relentless. "Is the puppy in your car? Where's your car? Is that over there?" He pointed to the glass doors into the parking lot, where cars gleamed under the afternoon sun. "Or is it your car? Is that where the puppy you wanted to show my 6-year-old daughter is?" I remember standing there, clutching the edge of the cashier's counter, thinking that if my dad would just let the guy go, maybe he could lead us to the puppy. I was still young enough to believe there might actually be a dog, my mind caught between confusion and hope. But before anything else could happen, 3 men in yellow jackets appeared, moving quickly through the crowd. I couldn't read the word on their jackets, but I knew the letters, SSURIDY. Security. They surrounded the man, and my dad finally let go of his shoulder. The yellow-jacketed men took hold of him instead, their hands firm but calm. By this point, my sister was crying, quiet sobs shaking her small frame. My dad walked back to us, his face still flushed with anger but softening as he looked at us. He took my hand again, his palm warm and steady, and wrapped his other arm around my sister's shoulders, pulling her close. "Can I use your phone?" he asked the cashier, who nodded and led us to a small office behind the counter. In the office, a cramped room with a desk and a rotary phone, my dad called our mom. He spoke quickly, his voice low, explaining what had happened. He reassured my sister, kneeling down to her level. "You're not in trouble, sweetheart," he said, his tone gentle now. "In fact, you're in the least amount of trouble anyone has ever been in the history of the world. You did the right thing by coming to ask me about that puppy." I piped up, still clinging to the idea of the dog. "Are we still going to see it?" My dad looked at me, his eyes tired but kind. "Sorry, son," he said. "The puppy ran away." Our mom arrived just a few minutes later, her face pale with worry as she rushed into the office. We left the store, and as we stepped outside, I saw police cars pulling into the parking lot, their lights flashing red and blue. My sister, still sniffling, looked up at our mom. "Are they going to help find the puppy?" she asked. Mom hesitated, then said, No, sweetie, they're here for something else." Years later, when I was much older, I remembered this incident and asked my dad about it. He sat me down, his face serious, and filled in the details I'd been too young to understand. Apparently, when the police searched the man's car, they found rope, duct tape, a knife, pliers, and a hacksaw, a chilling collection that made my stomach turn just hearing about it. At his apartment, they discovered a whole shitload of child pornography, the kind of stuff that makes your skin crawl. My dad and sister had to testify at his trial, and the guy was sentenced to 20 years in prison. That was about 2 years ago from now, which means, depending on parole or other circumstances, he could be out by now. The memory of that day had faded over time, buried under the ordinary moments of growing up. But recently, reading other people's stories online brought it all rushing back. The long-haired man, my dad's furious voice, my sister's quiet nod, and the weight of what could have happened if she hadn't come back to us in that Lego aisle. It's a story I'll never forget, not just because of fear, but because of how fiercely my dad protected us, and how my sister's quick thinking kept her safe. About 3 years ago, my mom and stepdad split up, and my mom, my sister, and I moved into a new place. It was a decent neighborhood, not fancy, but safe, quiet, and filled mostly with elderly folks and young families. The streets were lined with modest houses, neat lawns, and the occasional tricycle left out on a driveway. I was 16 at the time, and my sister was 10. Moving in, I never felt unsafe, and even after what happened, I still don't. But there were a couple of strange incidents that shook me, and they've stuck with me ever since. One night, my mom was out working. She's a relief worker for women's shelters, and her hours are all over the place, often keeping her out late. That evening, it was just me and my sister at home. We were having a cozy movie night, sprawled on the couch with blankets, the TV casting a soft glow across the living room. Around 9:30, I decided to order a pizza, partly because I was hungry, partly because I'm a pretty cool big sister. I placed the order, expecting the usual 30 to 40-minute wait. But about 15 minutes later, I noticed lights outside the house, twin beams cutting through the darkness. I figured it was the pizza guy, which seemed odd since they're never that fast. Still, I wasn't about to complain. I got up and peered through the living room window, pulling the curtain aside just enough to see. A small blue car was parked on the side of the road, right in front of our house. Its engine was off, and the driver wasn't moving. No getting out, no rustling for a pizza bag, nothing. He just sat there, staring straight ahead, his silhouette rigid against the dim streetlight. I still thought it might be the delivery guy, maybe checking his phone or something. What the heck? Get out and bring me my pizza, I muttered under my breath, half annoyed, half amused. But he didn't budge. Shrugging it off, I went back to the couch, figuring he was waiting for someone else, maybe one of the neighbors. 20 minutes later, the actual pizza guy showed up, his car pulling into the driveway with the familiar logo on the side. As I opened the door to pay, I noticed the blue car was still there, unchanged, the driver still sitting like a statue. The pizza guy handed me the box and asked, "Hey, do you know that guy in the car out there?" I shook my head, confused. He leaned in a bit, lowering his voice. He creeped me out. When I walked by, he pressed his face right up against his window and stared at me the whole way to your door. A chill ran down my spine. I thanked the pizza guy, took the pizza, and locked the door behind him, double-checking the deadbolt. My sister and I ate, but I kept glancing at the window, the warmth of the pizza doing little to ease the growing knot in my stomach. After we finished, my sister fell asleep on the couch, her head resting on a pillow, the movie still playing softly. I turned off the TV, plunged the room into quiet, and headed upstairs to my bedroom. But I couldn't shake the unease. Every hour or so, I crept back downstairs to check if the car was still there. Each time, it was same spot, same driver, sitting upright with his arms stiff on the steering wheel, staring straight ahead. Not on his phone, not listening to music, not moving at all. It wasn't normal. Around 2 a.m., I checked again and my heart skipped a beat. The guy had moved, not out of the car, but to the passenger seat. Now he was propped up, his chin resting on his hand, staring directly at our house. The streetlight caught the edge of his face, but I couldn't make out details, just the eerie stillness of his gaze. My pulse quickened, and I started to panic, but I told myself I was overreacting. It's probably nothing, I whispered, trying to calm down. I went back upstairs, pacing my room, convincing myself he'd leave soon. An hour and a half later, around 3:30 a.m., I couldn't stand it anymore. I had this gnawing fear that he was waiting for me to fall asleep, maybe planning to break in and rob us. Or worse. This time, I decided to send a message. Instead of keeping the lights off, I flicked on the living room lamp, letting the glow spill out through the window. I pulled the curtain back, holding my phone to my ear like I was calling someone, hoping he'd think I was dialing the cops. My hands were shaking, but I stood there, staring out at the car, willing him to leave. I didn't actually call the police. I kept telling myself it wasn't illegal to park on the street, and I didn't want to make a fool of myself if it turned out to be nothing. Then he moved. The car door opened and he stepped out. My breath caught in my throat. I thought maybe he was just switching back to the driver's seat, but instead, he closed the door, leaned against it, and stuffed both hands in his pockets. He stood there, staring right at me, his silhouette sharp against the streetlight's glare. I couldn't see his face, just the dark shape of him, motionless, watching. My heart pounded so hard I could hear it. We locked eyes, or at least it felt like we did, for maybe 30 seconds. It was too much. I yanked the curtains shut, my hands trembling, and stumbled back from the window. I grabbed my phone and called my mom. When she answered, I spilled everything. The car, the guy, the staring, the pizza guy's comment. Her voice was tight with concern. "Deadbolt the door," she said. "If he does anything else or doesn't get back in the car, call the police." I agreed, and she hung up promising to check in soon. I locked every door, checked every window, and stood in the dark living room. My phone clutched like a lifeline. 2 agonizing minutes later, I worked up the courage to peek through the curtain again. He was still there, standing in the same spot, staring at the house. My fingers hovered over the police number, ready to hit call. But just as I was about to, he suddenly jerked his head toward the neighbor's house across the street. He scrambled back into his car, the door slamming shut. I found out the next day that my neighbor had opened his front door and looked out, probably noticing the guy too. But even then, the man didn't drive away. He stayed in the car, still facing our house, still watching, until 6 a.m. I stayed up the entire night, too wired to sleep, checking the window every so often. I don't know exactly when he left, but the last time I looked, around 6, he was gone, exhausted. I finally crawled into bed, trying to brush it off as just some weird dude. But it wasn't over. For the next few days, I stayed at friend houses, keeping busy since it was summer break. When I got back home, my mom sat me down, her face serious. She told me that every day while I was gone, a blue car, same description, had driven slowly past our house and honked. She didn't recognize the driver, and when she tried to go outside to take a picture of the car or its license plate, it sped off. After it happened 4 times. She called the police, reported the strange behavior, and gave them a description of the vehicle. They promised to keep an eye out for any similar incidents. 2 weeks later, the blue car was back, parked in front of our house again. This time it was empty, no driver, no one around. It sat there until the city towed it away. That was the last we heard of it. The police later told us the car had been stolen 3 months earlier from a town 5 hours away. No explanation, no answers, just that one fact. It's still one of the creepiest, most unexplainable things I've ever experienced. Looking back, I'm not sure why I didn't call the police that night. I was scared, but I kept second-guessing myself, worried I'd blow it out of proportion. Now, I wonder what that guy wanted, why he sat there for hours, why he kept coming back. The memory of his silhouette, staring through the dark, still gives me chills. When I was in 9th grade, there was this older boy in my science class who stood out, but not in a good way. He barely showed up, always slipping in late or skipping altogether, and our teacher couldn't stand him. He had this worn-out jacket he wore every day, the kind with frayed cuffs and faded patches, and he carried the sharp smell of cigarette smoke wherever he went, like it was part of him. I didn't know much about him, just that he was trouble, the kind of kid who made you uneasy without even trying. One morning, on my way into school, I was weaving through the usual crowd of kids by the front doors when he appeared out of nowhere. He swooped in, his jacket flapping, and handed me a hot chocolate in a to-go cup, the steam curling up from the lid. I was caught off guard, my hands automatically closing around the warm cup. Thanks, I said, managing a quick smile before hurrying off. I had been headed to the nurse's office anyway, so I kept moving, the hot chocolate feeling oddly heavy in my grip. Once I was alone with the school nurse, a woman who'd known me since kindergarten, her office a familiar mix of antiseptic and old posters. She brought it up. She'd seen the exchange outside, her sharp eyes catching everything. "You should stay away from that boy," she said, her voice low and serious, her glasses slipping down her nose as she leaned forward. I trusted her. She'd patched me up through scraped knees and fevers, so her warning hit hard. I nodded, promising myself I'd keep my distance. I saw him a few more times in science class after that, slouched in the back, doodling or staring out the window. Then, just like that, he stopped coming. He vanished from school entirely, and I didn't think much of it. Kids like him sometimes just dropped out, or so I figured. That was that, or so I thought. Fast forward to college. I'd moved across the state to a school near where my mom lived, settling into a new rhythm of dorm life, late-night study sessions, and crowded lecture halls. About a year in, I started getting messages on Facebook from him. I was stunned. For 5 years had passed since that hot chocolate moment, and I barely remembered his face. How had he found me? The messages were strange, disjointed, like he was typing stream of consciousness nonsense. I ignored them, hoping he'd lose interest. Then the text messages started. They came from a random number. But I knew it was him. The same rambling, unhinged tone as the Facebook messages. They made no sense, jumping from cryptic phrases to weirdly personal comments. I felt a prickle of unease, but brushed it off, telling myself he was just bored or messing around. Finally, I texted back, firm but polite, "Please leave me alone." His response? Pictures he'd drawn. Crude sketches sent as attachments, their subjects unclear but unsettling. I blocked the number, my stomach churning. It didn't stop. I was in a lab class one night, my phone buzzing relentlessly in my bag. When I checked it later, I found voicemails, multiple voicemails from him, each one more incoherent than the last. His voice was frantic, slurred, like he was talking to himself as much as to me. I was more annoyed than scared at first, deleting them with a roll of my eyes. But he kept calling a few times a day, leaving messages that filled my voicemail to capacity. Every single day. My annoyance turned to frustration, then to a creeping dread I couldn't shake. One day, I got a text from him asking for my address. That was it. Line crossed. I fired back a message. "I have no idea how you even got my number, but you're going too far. Stop." My hand was shaking as I sent it, and I blocked that number too. For a while, I thought it was over, but then the calls started again, this time from a different number I didn't recognize. They came every evening, like clockwork. I don't know why I didn't pay more attention to it. Maybe I was too caught up in school, or maybe I didn't want to admit how much it was getting to me. Then came the voicemail that changed everything. It was from a woman, her voice professional but hesitant. "Hi, my name is Cindy. I'm calling in regards to, his name. His doctor would like to get in touch with you. Thanks." My heart sank. My mom knew a bit about the guy bothering me. I'd mentioned the messages in passing, but when she heard about this, she was alarmed. She used to work at the hospital Cindy was calling from, so she called him back for me. What she found out was disturbing. Apparently, he'd been admitted to the hospital's mental health unit shortly after I blocked his number. He'd been telling his doctors, nurses, everyone, that we were engaged. He talked about me constantly, spinning some delusional story about our relationship. He'd even given consent for me to be contacted about his condition. My mom set them straight, explaining that he was making it all up, that I barely knew him. The woman on the phone sounded disappointed, almost sad, and said the doctors would try to explain reality to him and get him to stop contacting me. That night, my phone exploded with voicemails. He'd broken out of the hospital and stolen a car. The messages were chilling, his voice swinging wildly between tones. At first, he sounded lovesick, almost tender. "I'm coming to you. I'm going to find you. We're going to Alaska. We're getting married, and Phoebe from Friends will be there." Then his voice darkened, insistent, threatening. "No. Seriously, I'm coming to take you. You're coming with me. I'm taking you." The last voicemail ended with the sound of police sirens wailing in the background, growing louder as his voice faded. He mentioned the street my mom lived on, muttering it over and over like a mantra. My blood ran cold. The next day, my mom took me to the police station. I was shaking as we explained everything. The messages, the calls, the escape. The officer listened, his face unreadable, and said there wasn't enough evidence to press charges. They could take a report, he said, and if he bothered me again, maybe something could be done. It felt like a brush off, but I was too drained to argue. My mom called the hospital again off, furious this time, demanding to know what had happened. When they refused to talk, she hung up, clearly annoyed. Weeks later, I got an automated call from a correctional facility, his voice on the line asking to speak with me. I declined, my heart racing, and that was the last I ever heard from him. I still have some of his messages saved, including an unnervingly long, detailed one about a house he wanted to build for us. Every word dripping with obsession. I also have a news article about his escape and the stolen car. Proof it wasn't just a bad dream. And somewhere, I believe, I still have at least one of those voicemails, though I haven't listened to it in years. The final voicemail I kept is different from the others. It's calmer, eerily so, like he's resigned but still delusional. He's talking from what I think is a police station, his voice steady, almost wistful. You remember talking about the Lion King's pride? We had this whole conversation on Facebook about it. How it's awesome. Well, I busted out of the hospital trying to get to you. I grew out my mustache for you. It's your mustache. I'm yours, you're mine if you want to be. I tried to get to you, but somebody pulled me over and stopped me. So I'm here at the county jail and it's not good, but it's always good because I'm thinking about you the entire time. I love you very much, and I'm not going to stop talking till anyway. We're getting married, and Phoebe can watch from a distance, or she can stand right there, be in the wedding too. We'll play Monopoly. I'll get the game. I'll fight for it. I'll kick that door down for you. Remember that? I love you so much, and you're with me right now, and you'll always be with me. This is going to work, because I love you. All right. I'm so glad you got a longer chance to talk. Had so much fun in the police car, though. They were playing songs that were so happy. Brought me back. The red light above the police car. He pulled out of the station, went right to the yellow line, and held it there the whole time. It was awesome. All right, that car is going to be awesome when you drive it. In the future, we're going to California. We're going to escape too, after we do a bunch of other things. We'll do your plan. We'll be forever young, if you want. Then it cuts off, leaving me with a knot in my chest that still hasn't fully untied. That whole experience left me rattled, looking over my shoulder for months, wondering if he'd somehow find me again. It's faded with time, but every now and then a random call or message makes my heart skip, and I'm right back in that college dorm, listening to his voice in the dark. A couple of weeks ago, my boyfriend and I decided to take advantage of a rare Friday off from our university classes and head to the coast for a weekend of hiking and camping. We'd planned a 3-day trip, hopping between 3 small towns, each with its own trails and campsites. This story is about the first town we stayed in, a place that started out idyllic, but turned into one of the creepiest experiences of my life. The first town was barely a town at all, just a scattering of small houses, sprawling farmlands, and a handful of people. It felt like stepping into a postcard, with rolling fields stretching toward the horizon and the faint tang of salt in the air from the nearby sea. It was off-season, so the usual trickle of tourists drawn to the area's main attraction, an ancient Greek city, its ruins crumbling majestically on a hillside, was nowhere to be seen. We didn't mind the quiet. It made the idea of camping feel even more like an escape. We'd done some research and found a highly recommended campground on TripAdvisor, praised for its scenic views and cozy setup. Feeling confident, we didn't bother calling ahead. Just drove straight to the site, our car packed with camping gear and snacks. When we pulled up, the gate was wide open, swinging slightly in the breeze, which didn't seem too strange at first. But as we stepped out, the place felt eerily deserted. No cars, no voices, just the rustle of leaves and the distant hum of insects. We knocked on the office door and called out, "Hello? Anyone here?" No response. Peering through a window, we saw an outdoor bar area, fully stocked with expensive bottles of liquor lined up like soldiers, and a kitchen table nearby with plates of food left out half-eaten. It was as if someone had stepped away mid-meal and never come back. My boyfriend frowned, his brow furrowing. "It's weird they leave everything open like this," he said, his voice low. I nodded, but we brushed it off, figuring it was a small, tight-knit community where crime wasn't a concern. Still, the emptiness gnawed at me a little. We decided to check other nearby campgrounds to see if they were open. The first one we tried was closed, the owner explaining that their grounds were too messy to accept guests. When we asked about the first campground, the man's face tightened. "Don't go there," he said sharply. "I don't recommend it." When we pressed him for a reason, he just repeated, "Just don't," and turned away. The second campground, he suggested, was also closed, leaving us frustrated. Back in the car, I spotted a signboard for the original site, half hidden by overgrown grass, with a phone number scrawled on it. We called, and a man picked up, his voice gruff but friendly. He introduced himself as one of the owners, running the place with his wife. "We're out for a couple of hours," he said, "but we'll be back by evening. Go ahead and set up your camp, and we'll meet later." It sounded good enough, so we drove back to the site, a secluded spot nestled among rolling hills and dense trees, the kind of place that felt like it belonged in a painting. We set up our tent in a grassy clearing, the late morning sun warming our backs as we hammered stakes and strung up the rainfly. The campground was picturesque, with wildflowers down the edges and a faint breeze carrying the scent of pine. Satisfied, we grabbed our backpacks and headed out to explore, spending the day hiking trails that wound through forests and along cliffs overlooking the sea. We wandered through the ancient ruins, their weathered stones whispering stories of a long-gone civilization, and stopped for lunch at a small panzion in town, where we savored fresh bread and grilled fish. It was a perfect day, exhausting but exhilarating, and by around 8 p.m. after dinner, we started making our way back to the campground, our legs heavy but our spirits high. That's when things got weird. When we reached the campground, it was still empty, no sign of the owners or anyone else. The gate was still open, the bar and kitchen unchanged, the food on the table now attracting a few lazy flies. It was late, the sky a deep indigo, and the silence felt heavier than it had that morning. My boyfriend called the owners again, and the same man answered. "Oh, we decided not to come back tonight," he said casually, as if it was no big deal. "Just leave the money under the table mat by Gross the Bar. The kitchen and bathrooms are open if you need them." Then he hung up. I exchanged a glance with my boyfriend, my unease mirrored in his eyes. "This doesn't feel right," he said, his voice tight. He's usually the calm one, steady and unflappable, so his nervousness set me on edge. The campground was massive, the yard where we'd pitched our tent swallowed by darkness, with no lights to break the gloom. The open bar, the unattended house. It was all too strange, like a business left vulnerable to strangers. "Why would they trust us like this?" he muttered, scanning the shadows. I tried to stay practical, not wanting to feed his anxiety. "If you're really feeling off, we can pack up and stay at the panzion we ate at," I offered. They had rooms available. He nodded, his jaw tight, and pulled out his phone, turning on the flashlight. The beam cut through the dark, casting long shadows as he swept it across the yard. We agreed to break camp and leave, the decision settling like a weight in my chest. I started packing, folding the tent with practiced efficiency, while my boyfriend held the light, but he kept moving it, swinging the beam toward the trees, the wooden cabins, the bathroom building in the distance. "Can you keep it steady?" I snapped, my voice sharper than I meant, frustration mixing with the growing tension. I could feel his worry radiating off him, and it was making it harder to focus. The tent stakes were stubborn, the fabric slippery in my hands, and the shifting light wasn't helping. He didn't respond, just kept scanning, his breathing uneven. "Hurry it up," he said at one point, his tone clipped, almost pleading. I bit back a retort, sensing how close he was to panic. Finally, I got the tent folded and stuffed into its bag, and we grabbed our gear, moving quickly toward the car. My boyfriend's eyes darted around, his flashlight jittery, and I tried to calm him. "Relax, we're leaving," I said, though my own heart was pounding. The road back to town was dark and lonely, a narrow ribbon of dirt flanked by dense woods. We walked in silence, our footsteps crunching softly, the night pressing in around us. My boyfriend's tension hadn't eased, and as we put distance between us and campground, he finally spoke, his voice low, hesitant. "There's something I didn't want to say while we were still there," he said. I stopped, my stomach twisting. "What is it?" He swallowed, glancing back toward the campground, now just a dark smudge in the distance. "I didn't want to freak you out, but I'm sure I saw someone. In the dark, behind the cabins and by the bathrooms. Twice." A chill ran through me, sharp and cold. "What?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. He nodded, his face pale in the flashlight's glow. It wasn't an animal. It was a human figure, walking like a person, standing upright. That's why I kept checking, why I wanted to hurry. His words hit like a punch, and I felt the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I tried to rationalize it, clinging to logic. "It's a farm area," I said, my voice trembling. "There could be animals, maybe a cat or something moving around." He shook his head, adamant. "No, it was a person. I'm sure of it." His certainty was unshakable, and it scared me more than I wanted to admit. No one was supposed to be there except us. The owners had said they were gone, and we hadn't seen another soul all day. My eyes stung with the threat of tears, and I started walking faster, almost running, my backpack bouncing against my shoulders. I kept glancing back, half expecting to see a figure emerging from the dark. My boyfriend matched my pace, his flashlight sweeping the path ahead. We didn't speak, the weight of his words hanging between us. By the time we reached the lighted streets of the quiet town, my legs were burning and my chest was tight with fear. Only when we got to the Panzion, booked a room, and locked the door, checking it twice, did I finally start to relax, my body sinking into the stiff hotel bed. I'm a skeptical person by nature, always looking for the logical explanation. But I believe my boyfriend saw something that night. He's not the type to imagine things, and the way he reacted, the raw edge to his voice, the urgency in his movements, convinced me it was real. I don't know who was out there or what they wanted. Part of me doesn't want to know. All I know is that dark, isolated places like that campground will always give me the creeps now. The memory of that night still sends shivers down my spine, and I doubt I'll ever feel completely at ease in the wilderness again. My husband, boyfriend at the time, and I were on a road trip from San Francisco to Vancouver, British Columbia, a journey filled with winding highways, coastal views, and the thrill of adventure. We decided to spend one day exploring Portland, a city we'd never visited before, and had set up camp at Harriet Lake, a small, serene spot nestled deep in the Willamette National Forest, about 90 minutes outside the city. The lake was surrounded by towering pines, its waters reflecting the sky like a mirror, and our campsite felt like a private retreat from a world. That day had been perfect. Wandering Portland's quirky streets, sipping coffee, and soaking in the vibe. But what happened on the drive back to camp turned into a nightmare I'll never forget. We were heading back as the sun dipped low, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. The highway had narrowed to one lane in each direction, a ribbon of asphalt cutting through dense forest. On our left, sheer cliffs loomed, their rocky faces jagged in the fading light. On our right, the Clackamas River rushed by, its waters sparkling and turbulent. We approached the last stoplight in the final town before the road plunged fully into the wilderness, a sleepy place with a gas station and a diner as its main features. As we idled at the red light, a motorcycle pulled up beside us, its engine growling. The riders were a couple, both in their 50s, and something about them caught my eye. The man in front was short and pudgy, his leather jacket stretched tight across his shoulders, while the woman behind him was tall and lanky, her arms wrapped loosely around him. They reminded me of Boris and Natasha from the Rocky and Bullwinkle show, and I nudged my husband, giggling. "Look, it's Boris and Natasha," I whispered, expecting him to laugh too. He chuckled, but the light turned green, and the couple's reaction wiped the smile off my face. They both turned to look at us, their expressions unreadable behind their helmets, and then peeled out, the motorcycle roaring as they cut sharply in front of our car. Their sudden aggression startled me. They were driving like we'd done something to offend them, weaving to the curvy road ahead with reckless speed. Within moments, they disappear around a bend, leaving us in their dust. What was that about? I said, my voice tinged with unease. My husband shrugged, his hands tightening on the steering wheel. Guess we pissed them off somehow, he muttered, but his tone was more confused and worried. The road grew darker as we drove deeper into the forest, the cliffs and river closing in around us. A series of small, old green metal bridges crossed the Clackamas at intervals, their railings rusted but sturdy. Our cell signal had long since dropped, the bars on my phone replaced by a mocking no service. The sun was nearly gone now, the last streaks of light fading into a starless sky. The only other people we saw were a few fishermen along the riverbank, their silhouettes hunched as they cast lines in the twilight, trying for one last catch. The isolation was palpable, the forest swallowing sound and light, leaving only the hum of our car and the rush of the river. As we approached the final bridge before the turnoff to our campground, my stomach lurched. There, parked sideways across the narrow bridge, was the motorcycle, Boris and Natasha. They were just sitting there, blocking the way, their figures stark against the bridge's railings. As we slowed, I realized they were staring right at us, their helmets off now, their eyes locked on our car. It felt deliberate, like they'd been waiting for us. My heart started to pound, a cold sweat prickling my skin. What the hell are they doing? I whispered, my voice barely audible. My husband's jaw tightened, his hands gripping the wheel. I don't know, he said, easing the car closer. But we're getting past them. As we crept toward the bridge, I noticed a woman, Natasha, holding something in her hand. It was glowing faintly, trails of smoke curling upward, thick and unnatural. My first thought was that it might be a cigar or a blunt, but the smoke was too heavy, too voluminous, billowing in a way that didn't match anything recreational. My husband slowed further, preparing to edge around them, the bridge's narrow width leaving little room to maneuver. Then it happened. Just as we were about to pass, Natasha tossed a smoking object under our car with a flick of her wrist. My breath caught, time slowing as I watched it tumble across the pavement, trailing sparks. The couple sped off the bridge, their motorcycle roaring as they whipped around to face us again, stopping just beyond the bridge's end. They sat there, watching, like they were expecting something to happen. My husband didn't hesitate. "Hold on," he shouted, slamming his foot on the gas. He swerved hard, the car lurching as he steered us clear of the object. A split second later, a deafening boom shook the air, the explosion so forceful it rattled the windows. Whatever it was had detonated right where our car had been moments before. My heart was in my throat, my hands clutching the seatbelt as we sped away, the bridge shrinking in the rear view mirror. Boris and Natasha didn't follow, at least not right away. They peeled off down a side road, their taillight vanishing into the dark. My husband was furious, his knuckles white on the wheel, his breath coming in sharp bursts. "What the hell was that?" he yelled, his voice raw with anger and disbelief. I was beyond terrified, my mind racing with possibilities. Robbery, kidnapping, murder. Why else would they try to disable our car? My hand shook as I fumbled for my phone, forgetting there was no signal, the screen mocking me with its uselessness. "We need to get to the campsite," I said, my voice trembling. But what if they come after us? The thought consumed me. I was convinced they'd been following us earlier in the day, maybe even in Portland, waiting for the right moment. I pictured them tracking us to our tent, defenseless in the middle of nowhere, finishing whatever they'd started. My husband reached over, squeezing my hand. "They're gone," he said, trying to sound calm, but his eyes kept flicking to mirrors, checking for headlights. We reached the campground, our tent a small, vulnerable shape in the moonlight. I barely slept that night, jumping at every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig. I kept imagining their motorcycle roaring up the dirt path, their faces looming outside the tent. But they never came. We packed up at first light and left, the memory of that explosion seared into my mind. I still don't know what they wanted or why they targeted us. All I know is that my husband's quick thinking saved us, and the image of that couple staring as they waited for the blast still haunts me. About 2 weeks ago, I took a babysitting job for a 4-year-old boy whose mother had to work a late shift. His grandmother, who usually watched him, was in the hospital with some medical issues. So I stepped in. The boy's house was a cozy, single-story home in a quiet suburban neighborhood, the kind with neatly trimmed hedges and porch lights that glowed warmly at dusk. Inside, the living room was cluttered with toys and a well-worn couch, perfect for a day of kid-friendly chaos. The boy was a bundle of energy, and we spent the day playing games, building block towers, racing toy cars, and laughing until our sides hurt. When we got tired, we sprawled out in front of the TV, watching cartoons with a bowl of popcorn between us. It was a fun, easy day, the kind of babysitting gig that felt more like hanging out than work. As bedtime approached, things took a turn. I gave the boy a snack, apple slices and a few crackers, and told him it was time to put on his pajamas. Like most kids, he wasn't thrilled about bedtime. He pouted, stomped his feet, and whined, his face scrunching up in defiance. I stayed patient, guiding him to the tantrum with a mix of gentle coaxing and firm insistence. Eventually, he relented, and I got him into his room, a small space filled with stuffed animals, a race car-shaped bed, and a tiny TV mounted on the wall. I tucked him in, put on a movie, some colorful animated film he loved, and left the door open a crack, just enough to let a sliver of light spill in from the hallway. "Good night," I said, giving him a reassuring smile before heading back to the living room. I settled onto the couch, the TV now tuned to a sitcom, but I kept the volume low, so I could hear the boy got up or needed me. The house was quiet, save for the faint hum of the movie from his room and the occasional creak of the floorboards settling. For the first few minutes, everything was fine. I scrolled through my phone, half watching the show, feeling the day's exhaustion start catch up with me. But about 5 minutes later, the TV in the boys' room suddenly blared, the volume cranking up so loud it made me jump. The cheerful music of the movie filled the house, jarring in the stillness. I bolted down the hallway, my socks sliding on the hardwood floor, and pushed open his door. The boy was still in bed, lying under his blanket, but his face held a strange expression, wide-eyed, almost frozen, like he was caught between fear and confusion. I couldn't tell if he'd touched the remote or not. "Hey, don't mess with the TV, okay?" I said, trying to keep my voice calm as I grabbed the remote from the nightstand and turned the volume down. He looked at me, his small voice barely audible. It wasn't me, it was the man. A chill ran through me, my skin prickling. "What man?" I asked, forcing a smile, hoping he was just being imaginative. He pointed across the room to a massive teddy bear propped in the corner, its glassy eyes glinting in the TV's flickering light. The bear was almost as tall as me, its fur matted from years of hugs. I let out a shaky laugh, telling myself it was just a kid's imagination running wild. "Oh, that guy? He's just keeping watch," I said, ruffling his hair. I left the room, closing the door to the same crack, but my heart was beating a little faster now. Back in the living room, I tried to shake off the unease, sinking back into the couch. The sitcom was still playing, but I wasn't really watching anymore. My ears were tuned to the sound of the house, hyper alert for anything out of place. Then, out of nowhere, I heard it. A man's voice, low and muffled, like someone speaking in hushed tones on a phone in another room. My breath caught, and I froze, straining to listen. I muted the TV, the silence rushing in, and there it was again, faint but unmistakable. A deep, gravelly murmur, too quiet to make out words, but definitely human. My heart pounded as I stood, my legs shaky. I told myself it could be a neighbor outside, or maybe the TV in the boys' room, but the sound was too close, too inside. Clutching my phone, I crept toward the hallway, my socks silent on the floor. The voice seemed to be coming from the direction of the boys' room, and every step felt like wading through molasses. When I reached his door, I noticed something blocking the crack of light, a shadow, broad and unmoving, covering most of the opening. My stomach twisted, and with a surge of courage I didn't know I had, I pushed the door open. The giant teddy bear toppled forward, hitting the floor with a soft thud. It had been propped against the door, its weight enough to obscure the light. I froze, my eyes darting around the room. The boy was sitting upright in bed, his blanket pulled tight around him, his face pale and eyes wide with fear. The TV was still playing, the movie's bright colors casting eerie shadows on the walls. I stepped inside, my voice trembling. "What's wrong?" I asked, scanning every corner, every shadow, for signs of an intruder. The closet door was shut, the window locked, nothing out of place. "I'm not mad if you're up playing," I added, trying to sound calm, though my pulse was racing. He peeked out from under the blanket, his voice small and quivering. The man was scaring me. My blood ran cold. I swallowed hard, kneeling beside his bed. "What's this man doing?" I asked, dreading the answer. He looked at me, his eyes huge in the dim light. "He wants to give you a boo-boo," he said. My heart stopped. In his childish language, a boo-boo meant hurt, and the way he said it, so matter-of-fact, so certain, sent a wave of terror through me. I didn't ask any more questions. I scooped him up, blanket and all, his small body warm and trembling against mine, and started for the door. As I reached for the handle, a chorus of noises erupted behind us. Electronic beeps and whirs from a pile of toys in the corner, their lights flashing like they'd been triggered all at once. Before I could react, something heavy smashed against the wall near the door, a plastic truck skidding across the floor. The boy clung to me tighter, his voice a terrified whisper. "He's very angry." A scream lodged in my throat, but I didn't let it out. Adrenaline took over, and I ran, clutching the boy as I bolted to the hallway, my bare feet slapping the floor. Tears stung my eyes, and I could hear the boy sobbing softly against my shoulder. We were both crying now, the house feeling like a maze closing in around us. I made it to master bedroom, his mother's room, and locked the door, twisting the deadbolt with shaking hands. I set the boy on the bed, pulling the covers over him, and dialed his mother's number. No answer. My heart sank, but I left a voicemail, my voice cracking as I begged her to call back. With no other options, I stayed in that room, the boy curled up in his mother's bed, his breathing eventually slowing as he drifted off. I sat on the floor, my back against the door, my phone gripped tightly, listening for any sound, a creak, a whisper, anything. The house was silent now, oppressively so, but the quiet only made me more paranoid. I kept replaying the night in my head, the voice, the teddy bear, the toys, the boy's words. Was there really someone in the house, or was it all in my head, amplified by a kid's imagination? I didn't know, but I wasn't taking chances. The mother finally came home around midnight, her keys jingling as she unlocked the front door. I met her in the living room, my nerves still frayed, and told her everything. The TV, the voice, the teddy bear, the toys, the boys' talk of a man. I expected her to be alarmed, but she just listened, her face calm, almost amused. "Oh, he says stuff like that sometimes," she said with a light laugh, brushing it off. "He talks about a man or other weird things. It's just his imagination." Her nonchalance stunned me, but I didn't argue. I was too drained, too shaken. I gathered my things and left, vowing never to babysit there again. The drive home was a blur, the streetlights casting long shadows that made me jumpy. That night still haunts me. The low murmur of that voice, the boy's terrified eyes, the crash of that toy against the wall. I don't know what happened in that house, but I know what I heard, what I felt, and I know I'll never step foot in there again. When I was 10 years old, I lived in a small coastal town in Newfoundland, a place where the world felt both vast and intimate. Our house at the edge of town, surrounded by sprawling forests that stretch for acres behind every home. Their dense canopies of pine and spruce a breathtaking backdrop to my childhood. The woods were a wonderland of moss-covered rocks, winding streams and hidden clearings, and I loved their quiet beauty. Now, at 21, living in the concrete bustle of the city in Alberta, I sometimes find myself missing those forests, their earthy scent, the way the light filtered through the leaves. But those memories always come with shadow, an unsettling recollection of something that happened one night when I ventured into the trees alone. By 4th grade, I'd earned a bit of independence. As an only child with my father working months at a time in another province, I was often left to my own devices. My mother trusted me to stay home alone when she went to visit my grandmother and aunt, who lived just a few minutes down the road. Those evenings were a treasure. Late-night movies, video games, and, on rare occasions, explorations into the forest behind our house. I never went far, always sticking to a familiar path that led to a large rock formation, a jagged outcrop I loved to climb. From its top, I could see the world. Well, my world. The treetops swaying gently, the distant glow of our house's windows, a comforting anchor that kept me from feeling lost. The forest was my private sanctuary, a place where I felt safe and free. One night, with my mother out visiting, I decided to head into the woods. The air was cool, carrying the sharp tang of pine, and the sky was a deep indigo, speckled with early stars. I grabbed a flashlight, its beam cutting a narrow path through the dusk, and made my way to the rock formation. I knew the route by heart. Past the old oak with the gnarled roots, over the trickle of a stream, and up the gentle slope to the rocks. I was scaling the formation, my sneakers gripping the rough stone, when I heard something that stopped me cold. A faint, relentless crying drifting from deeper in the forest. It wasn't a sound I expected. The woods were alive with noises, rustling leaves, chirping crickets, the occasional hoot of an owl. But this was different. It sounded like a child, maybe even an infant, sobbing without pause. I froze, perched halfway up the rock, my flashlight beam trembling as I aimed it toward the trees. At first, I thought my ears were playing tricks on me, the sound too out of place to be real. I listened for a good few minutes, the crying steady and unbroken, pulling at my curiosity and concern. In my mind, I pictured a young girl, lost and scared, who'd wandered too far from home. My heart raced with the urge to help. I considered running back to the house to call my mother, but the thought of the girl drifting further away, her cries fading beyond reach, stopped me. I couldn't just leave her. With a deep breath, I decided to find the source myself. I slid down the rock, my flashlight sweeping the path ahead, and started moving deeper into the forest, beyond my usual boundaries. The crying grew louder as I went, but it wasn't easy to pinpoint. The sound seemed to bounce off the trees, disorienting me as I stumbled over roots and ducked under low branches. I tried different directions, doubling back when the cries seemed to fade, my sneakers sinking into the soft earth. It was trial and error, each step fueled by a mix of determination and growing unease. The deeper I went, the stranger the crying sounded. It was consistent, no pauses, no words, just a continuous wail that never faltered. And there was something else. The closer I got, the more metallic it seemed, like it was coming through a speaker rather than a human throat. My stomach twisted, but I pressed on, the forest growing denser, the trees crowding closer. Finally, I reached a small clearing I had never seen before, a patch of open ground ringed by sparse trees and low bushes. The crying was loud now, unmistakable, and my flashlight caught a glint of something unnatural among the foliage. There, half hidden in a bush, was a large gray tape recorder, its bulky frame out of place in the wild. The crying poured from its speaker, a looped, artificial sound that sent a shiver down my spine. My excitement turned to dread. I'd come all this way expecting to find a person, a scared child who needed help, but it was just a machine. The realization hit me hard. This wasn't right. Why was a tape recorder out here, playing a child's cries? My hand hovered over the stop button, ready to silence it, when another sound froze me in place. Steady, deliberate footsteps approaching from the opposite side of clearing. I swung my flashlight, its beam catching nothing but shadows at first. Then I saw it, a tall, dark figure moving toward me, just beyond the clearing's edge. Panic surged through me, my heart pounding so loud I could hear it. I didn't wait to see more. I turned and ran, the tape recorder's wails fading behind me as I plunged back into the forest. Fear sharpened my senses, and by some miracle, I recognized my way back, past a familiar twisted tree, over a mossy log, landmarks I'd noted without realizing. I didn't dare look behind me, didn't stop to listen for pursuit. All I could think was get home, get home, get home. When I saw the rock formation looming ahead, relief flooded me. I knew the path from there, my feet pounding the familiar ground until I burst out of the forest and into our backyard. The house stood like a beacon, its porch light casting a warm glow. I sprinted inside, slamming the door behind me and locking it with trembling hands. My breath came in gasps as I ran through the house, shutting off every light, plunging the rooms into darkness. I didn't want whoever was out there to know where I lived, to see me through the windows. I crept to my bedroom, my heart still racing, and pulled the curtains tight, leaving just a sliver to peek through. I stood by the window for an hour, maybe more, staring at the forest edge, waiting for a figure to emerge from the shadows. My eyes strained against the dark, every rustle of leaves making me flinch. But nothing came. No footsteps, no silhouette, just the endless whisper of the wind through the trees. Eventually, exhaustion overtook fear, and I crawled into bed, pulling the covers over my head like a shield. I didn't tell my mother what happened that night. Too scared or ashamed to admit how far I'd gone, how close I'd come to something I couldn't understand. And after that, I never went back into those woods again, my sanctuary tainted by the memory of that metallic cry and the figure in the dark. Looking back, I realized how lucky I was to find my way home. Those landmarks, that instinctive sense of direction, they probably saved my life. The tape recorder, the footsteps, the figure, they're pieces of a puzzle I've never solved, and part of me hopes I never do. The forest I once loved is now a place of unease, its beauty forever laced with the chill of that night. When I was 21, I moved to San Francisco to chase a job opportunity that felt like my big break. The city was vibrant, all fog-draped hills and bustling streets, but the cost of living was brutal. To afford a place, I needed a roommate, so I scoured Craigslist and found Beth, a woman in her late 20s looking to share a 2-bedroom apartment in the Mission District. The place was a steal. High ceilings, creaky hardwood floors, and windows that let in slanted beams of light. Beth seemed nice enough during our brief meeting. Quiet, artsy, with a quick smile and a habit of fidgeting with her bracelets. She worked as a freelance graphic designer, which sounded cool, and I figured we'd get along fine. I signed a lease, moved in, and at first, everything seemed normal. But it didn't take long for things to get weird. Beth was obsessed with Shia LaBeouf. Not in a casual fangirl way, but in a way that felt like it consumed her. Her room was a shrine to him. Posters of Transformers and holes plastered every wall, magazine clippings pinned in chaotic collages, and a life-size cardboard cutout of him from some red carpet event propped by her bed. She'd spend hours watching his movies on a loop, the sound bleeding through the thin walls into my room. At first, I thought it was quirky, maybe even funny. I'd tease her lightly, saying, "Another Shia marathon," and she'd laugh. But there was a strange intensity in her eyes, like she wasn't entirely joking when she called him her muse. Her behavior started to unsettle me. She'd leave notes around the apartment, scribbled on Post-its or torn scraps of paper, with cryptic phrases like, "Shia knows," or "he's watching." I found them stuck to the fridge, slipped under my door, even taped to the bathroom mirror. I asked her about it once, trying to keep my tone light. "Hey, Beth, what's with the notes?" She just stared at me, her bracelets jingling as she twisted them, and said, You'll understand when you're ready." Her voice was calm, but it sent a chill down my spine. I started throwing the notes away, hoping she'd stop, but they kept appearing more frequent and more bizarre. Then there was the staring. I'd catch her watching me when I was cooking dinner, reading on the couch, or just walking to my room. She'd stand in doorways, her head tilted, her eyes unblinking, like she was studying me. It wasn't hostile, exactly, but it was unnerving, like I was an exhibit in a museum. One night, I was in the kitchen chopping vegetables, the rhythmic thwack of the knife against the cutting board filling the silence, when I felt her presence. I turned, and there she was, leaning against the doorframe, her arms crossed, just staring. "Can I help you?" I asked, my voice sharper than I meant. She didn't answer, just smiled faintly and walked away. My appetite vanished. The half-chopped carrots left on the counter as I retreated to my room. The worst part started a few weeks in. I began waking up in the middle of the night, my heart racing, with the unshakable feeling that someone was in my room. The first time, I chalked it up to a bad dream, my eyes scanning the shadows for anything out of place. My room was small, bed, desk, a thrift store dresser, but it felt suffocating in the dark. I'd lie there, straining to hear over the hum of the city outside, convincing myself it was nothing. But it kept happening night after night, that same prickling sense of being watched. I started locking my door before bed, the click of the deadbolt a small comfort, but it didn't stop the feeling. One night, I woke up around 2 a.m., my mouth dry and my pulse pounding. The air felt heavy, charged with something I couldn't name. I reached for my phone, its glow cutting to the darkness, and that's when I saw it. A shadow moving across the sliver of light under my door. Someone was standing right outside. My breath caught, my body frozen as I watched the shadow shift, linger, then move away. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. My back pressed against the headboard, my phone clutched like a lifeline. The next morning, I checked the hallway. Nothing was out of place, but I knew what I'd seen. Things escalated from there. I started noticing my stuff wasn't where I left it. Books rearranged, a scarf missing, my laptop slightly askew on my desk. I confronted Beth, trying to stay calm. "Have you been in my room?" I asked, standing in the living room, my arms crossed to hide my shaking hands. She was sprawled on the couch, a Shia LaBeouf documentary playing on her laptop. She looked up, her expression blank. "Why would I do that?" she said, her voice flat, before turning back to the screen. I didn't push it, but I started keeping my valuables in a locked bag under my bed. The breaking point came one night, when I got home late from work, exhausted and craving sleep. As I unlocked the front door, I noticed a kitchen knife, one of the big ones from the block on the counter, lying on the floor near the entryway. It was out of place, its blade glinting under the hall light, and my stomach dropped. I picked it up, my hands trembling, and put it back in the block, telling myself it was an accident, maybe knocked over during cooking. But when I went to my room, I found another note slipped under the door, this one in Beth's looping handwriting. "He sees you." I tore it up, my heart hammering, and checked the lock on my door twice before going to bed. That night, I woke up again, the same oppressive feeling pressing down on me. But this time, I heard something, a soft creak, like weight shifting on the floorboards outside my door. I sat up, my breath shallow, and saw that same shadow under the door, larger now, unmoving. I don't know what possessed me, but I grabbed my phone, turned on the flashlight, and flung the door open. Beth was standing there, inches from the threshold, her eyes wide and glassy in the beam of light. She was holding another knife, not raised, just dangling loosely in her hand. My blood ran cold. "Beth, what the hell are you doing?" I shouted, my voice cracking with fear and anger. She blinked, like she was waking from a trance, and stepped back. I was just checking on you," she mumbled, her voice barely audible. She turned and shuffled back to her room, the knife still in her hand, the door closing softly behind her. I slammed my own door, locked it, and shoved my dresser against it, though it's scraping loudly against the floor. I didn't sleep, didn't even try. I sat on my bed, my phone ready to dial 911, replaying her vacant stare, the glint of a knife, the note's words looping in my head. The next morning, I packed a bag and left. I stayed with co-worker, crashing on her couch while I hunted for a new place. I never went back to the apartment, not even to get the rest of my stuff. I called the landlord, explained the situation in vague terms, enough to break the lease without dragging Beth into legal trouble. Maybe I should have reported her, but I just wanted out, away from her notes, her stares, her knives. I heard later from a mutual acquaintance that she moved out a few months after, leaving behind a stack of Shia LaBeouf posters and a reputation for being off. That experience left me rattled, my trust in strangers shaken. I still love San Francisco, its energy and chaos, but I'm cautious now, double-checking locks and avoiding roommates. The memory of Beth's shadow outside my door, the weight of her obsession, still creeps into my thoughts sometimes, especially on quiet nights when the city feels too still. When I was 14, my mom started dating a guy named Dan, a rugged, quiet man who'd moved to our small town in Pennsylvania after years working odd jobs across the country. He was in his late 40s, with weathered hands and a crooked smile that made him seem approachable but guarded. Dan had a son, Sam, who was 17, tall and lanky with a mop of dark hair and a sarcastic streak that matched my own. The four of us, Mom, Dan, Sam, and me, lived together in a drafty old house on the edge of town, surrounded by fields and a scattering of neighbors' homes. The house was a fixer-upper, with peeling paint and creaky stairs, but it had charm, and we were making our own. Sam and I got along well, bonding over video games and bad horror movies. And while Dan was strict, he was fair, the kind of guy who'd teach you how to change a tire but expect you to do it right. Life was good. But one night, something happened that shook me to my core, a memory that still lingers like a shadow. It was a chilly fall evening, the kind where the air smells of damp leaves and wood smoke. Mom was out at a book club meeting, leaving Dan, Sam, and me at home. We'd ordered pizza, extra pepperoni, Sam's favorite, and were sprawled in the living room, half watching a sci-fi flick on TV while joking about the cheesy special effects. The house was wired with an old intercom system, a relic from the previous owners, with speakers in every room that could pick up sounds from the front porch or back door. Dan had fixed it up, saying it was good for security, though we mostly used it to prank each other, whispering dumb jokes through the speakers. That night, around midnight, we were winding down, the pizza box empty and the movie nearing its climax, when the intercom crackled to life. At first, it was just static, a low hiss that made Sam roll his eyes. "Great, it's haunted now," he quipped, tossing a pillow at me. I laughed, but then we heard it, distinct, deliberate sounds from the front porch. A faint jingle like keys or loose change, followed by a soft scraping, as if someone was tampering with the lock. My stomach dropped, the laughter died in my throat. Sam sat up, his smirk gone, and Dan, who'd been dozing in the recliner, snapped awake, his eyes sharp. "Quiet," he said, his voice low and commanding, as he stood and moved to the intercom panel on the wall. He pressed a button, and the sounds grew clearer, a muffled grunt, then a metallic click, like a tool against a doorknob. Someone was trying to get in. My heart pounded, my hands clenching the couch cushion. Sam's face was pale, his usual bravado replaced by wide-eyed alarm. "Who's out there?" he whispered, barely audible. Dan held up a hand, silencing him, and leaned closer to the speaker, listening intently. The noises continued. Another scrape, a low murmur like two people whispering. I couldn't make out words, but the voices were deep, unmistakably male. Dan's expression hardened, his jaw tight. Without a word, he strode to the closet by the front door, where he kept a lock safe. I'd never seen inside it, but I knew he had a gun, a handgun he'd mentioned once. Say it was for protection in a house so far from town. He punched in the code. The safes beeped loud in the tense silence, and pulled out the gun, its black metal glinting under the living room light. My breath caught, fear mixing with a surreal sense of disbelief. This wasn't a movie anymore. This was real. "Stay here," Dan said, his voice calm but steely as he headed for the front door. Sam and I exchanged a look, both of us frozen on the couch, the TV's glow casting flickering shadows across the room. The intercom was still picking up sounds, more scraping, a faint thud, like someone testing the door's weight. I wanted to yell for Dan to stop, to call the police instead, but my voice was stuck, my body rooted to the spot. Sam reached for his phone, his hand shaking, but before he could dial, Dan was already at the door, turning the knob. He yanked it open, the cold night air rushing in, and stepped onto the porch, gun raised. "Who's out here?" he shouted, his voice booming, authoritative. I held my breath, expecting a confrontation, a shout, or worse, gunshots. But there was nothing. Silence, heavy and suffocating, broken only by the faint rustle of leaves and wind. Sam and I crept to the window, peering through the curtains, our faces pressed close to the glass. The porch light illuminated an empty scene. No figures, no movement, just the wooden steps and the gravel path leading to the dark field beyond. Dan stood there for a moment, scanning the yard, the gun still in his hand. Then he lowered it, his shoulders relaxing slightly, and came back inside, locking the door behind him. "Nobody's there," he said, his tone flat, but there was something in his eyes, something guarded, like he wasn't telling us everything. He put the gun back in the safe, the click of the lock echoing in the quiet, and sat back in a recliner, picking up the remote like nothing had happened. "Probably just kids messing around," he added, but his voice lacked conviction. Sam and I weren't convinced. "That didn't sound like kids," Sam said, his voice unsteady, his arms crossed tightly over his chest. I nodded, my mind replaying the deliberate sounds, the jingle, the scraping, the whispers. "Shouldn't we call the cops?" I asked, my voice small, still clutching the couch cushion like a shield. Dan shook his head. "No need. They're gone now. Go to bed, both of you." His tone was final, the kind that didn't invite argument, but it did little to ease a knot in my stomach. We turned off the TV, the sudden silence making the house feel even more exposed. Sam and I headed upstairs, our footsteps heavy on the creaky stairs. In the hallway, he grabbed my arm, his voice a harsh whisper. "That was no prank, and you know it. Dad's hiding something." I nodded, my throat tight. I'd seen the look on Dan's face, the way he dismissed it too quickly. But what could we do? We went to our rooms, and I locked my door, something I'd never felt the need to do before. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, every creak of the house making me flinch, the memory of those sounds looping in my head. The next morning, Dan was up early, drinking coffee at the kitchen table like it was any other day. Mom was back, bustling around, oblivious to the night's events. I wanted to tell her, but Sam caught my eye and shook his head slightly, a silent warning. I kept quiet, the unease settling deeper. Around noon, while Mom was out grocery shopping, Sam and I decided to check the front yard ourselves, hoping to find some clue, a footprint, a dropped tool, anything to make sense of what we heard. We stepped onto the porch, the autumn sun high, but doing little to warm the chill in my bones. Sam pointed to the gravel path, where the dirt was disturbed, faint scuff marks leading toward the field. We followed them, our sneakers crunching softly, until we reached the edge of the yard, where the grass gave way to wildflowers and tall weeds. There, hidden in the underbrush, we saw something that made my blood run cold. Two figures crouched low, barely visible through the foliage. They were men, older, dressed in dark jackets, their faces obscured. One held a rifle, its barrel glinting faintly, while the other had a handgun tucked into his belt. I grabbed Sam's arm, my nails digging into his sleeve, and we ducked behind a tree, our breaths shallow. My heart was pounding so hard, I thought it might give us away. The men didn't move, didn't speak, just watched the house with a stillness that felt predatory. I don't know how long we stayed there, crouched and trembling, but eventually, Sam tugged me back toward the house, his face ashen. We slipped inside, locking the door, and ran to find Dan, who was in the garage tinkering with his truck. "Dad, there's 2 guys out there," Sam blurted, his voice shaking. "They've got guns." I nodded, my words tumbling out, describing the men, the weapons, the way they were watching the house. Dan's face didn't change, but his eyes darkened, a flicker of something, anger, maybe, or fear, crossing his features. "Stay inside," he said, his voice low, and grabbed his jacket, heading for the back door. "Don't tell your mom about this, either of you." He was gone before we could protest, disappearing into the field behind the house. Sam and I waited, pacing the living room, our nerves frayed. I kept glancing at the windows, half expecting to see the men's faces pressed against the glass. When Dan came back, nearly an hour later, he looked unruffled, his hands stuffed in his pockets. "Taken care of," he said simply, and refused to say more, no matter how much we pressed. The rest of the day, he was quiet, his usual gruff warmth replaced by a distant edge that made me uneasy. We never saw those men again, and the intercom stayed silent after that night. Sam and I tried to piece it together, whispering theories in the safety of our rooms. Maybe Dan had a past, debts or enemies from his wandering years, or maybe it was something else entirely. But we never got answers. A year later, Mom and Dan split up, and we moved away, the house and its secrets left behind. I still think about that night. The crackle of the intercom, the glint of gun in Dan's hand, the men in the field, and the way Dan handled it, swift and silent, like he'd done it before. It's a puzzle I'll never solve, but it taught me that even the people closest to you can carry shadows you'll never fully understand. When I was 10 years old, I lived in a small mountain town in Colorado, a place where the air was crisp and the peaks loomed like silent giants over our little community. My best friends were 3 boys from my neighborhood, Tommy, Jake, and Mikey, all of us inseparable, always tearing through the streets on our bikes or building forts in the woods. We were at that age where summer felt endless, every day a new adventure waiting to unfold. Our town was safe, the kind of place where kids could roam until the streetlights flickered on, but it was nestled against a dense forest that stretched up the mountainside, a wild expanse that held both wonder and mystery. One summer afternoon, we set out on what we thought would be a thrilling game, only to stumble into something far darker than we could have imagined. It started innocently enough. We were bored, kicking rocks outside Tommy's house, when Jake suggested a game of hide and seek in the forest. But this wasn't your typical backyard version. Jake, always the instigator, proposed a twist. The boys would hide first, deep in the woods, and I'd have to find them. Once I did, we'd all hide together from a group of older boys they'd roped into playing, a trio of 13-year-olds known for being rough around the edges. The idea was to outsmart them, to prove we were cleverer than the big kids. I was hesitant. Those older boys had a mean streak, always shoving or taunting us when they got the chance. But Tommy's grin and Mikey's eager nod wore me down. "It'll be epic," Jake promised, his eyes glinting with mischief. I agreed, a mix of excitement and nerves bubbling in my chest. The plan was set. The boys would get a 10-minute head start to find their hiding spots in the forest, while I waited at the edge, near a gnarled pine we used as a landmark. The sun was high, casting dappled light through the canopy, and the air smelled of pine needles and earth. I sat on a rock, counting down the minutes, my sneakers scuffing the dirt. When the time was up, I shouted, "Ready or not, here I come," my voice echoing off the trees, and plunged into the forest, my eyes scanning for any sign of my friends. A flash of a t-shirt, a rustle in the bushes. The woods were familiar, a playground we explored countless times, but they felt different that day, vast and disorienting. I followed our usual paths, checking our favorite spots, a hollow log, a cluster of boulders, the base of a lightning-scarred tree, but found nothing. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. My calls at Tommy, Jake, growing hoarse, answered only by the chirp of birds and the whisper of the wind. Frustration crept in, tinged with a nagging worry. Had they gone too far? Were they messing with me? I pushed deeper, the trees closing in, the light dimming as the canopy thickened. Finally, I spotted Mikey, crouched behind a fallen tree, his red baseball cap a dead giveaway. "Got you," I whispered, grinning as I tapped his shoulder. He jumped and laughed, but his eyes darted nervously. "It's just us now," he said, his voice low. "Tommy and Jake ditched me." My stomach twisted. Why would they leave him? Before I could ask, Mikey grabbed my hand. "We gotta hide. Those older guys are coming and they're pissed." His urgency was contagious, and we scrambled to find a spot, settling in a dense thicket, the branches scratching our arms as we burrowed in. We waited, our breaths shallow, listening for the older boys. Sure enough, we heard them, loud, jeering voices, the crack of sticks under their sneakers. "Come out, you little brats," one shouted, followed by laughter that sent a chill down my spine. They sounded closer than I'd expected, their footsteps crunching through the underbrush. Mikey's hand tightened on mine, his face pale. "They're not playing," he whispered. "They were throwing rocks at me earlier." My heart raced, the game no longer feeling like a game. We stayed low, the thorns digging into our skin, praying they'd pass by. But then we heard something else. New voices, not the older boys, but deeper, rougher, speaking in low murmurs. Mikey and I froze, our eyes meeting in silent panic. These weren't kids. Peeking through the branches, I saw two men, maybe in their 30s, moving through the forest. One was tall and wiry, with a scruffy beard and a backpack slung over one shoulder. The other was stocky, his flannel shirt stained, a cigarette dangling from his lips. They weren't from our town. I'd never seen them before, and they weren't hiking or camping. They moved with purpose, their eyes scanning the ground, like they were searching for something. The older boys' voices faded, either scared off or too far to hear, but the men were getting closer. Mikey's breathing was ragged, and I clamped a hand over his mouth, my own heart pounding so loud I was sure they'd hear it. The men stopped just yards away, the wiry one muttering, "It's got to be around here somewhere." The stocky one grunted, tossing his cigarette into the dirt and grinding it out with his boot. I caught a glimpse of something in his hand, a small metallic object, glinting like a knife. My blood ran cold, every instinct screaming to run, but we couldn't move without giving ourselves away. They lingered for what felt like an eternity, poking at the ground with sticks, their voices low and tense. Then, mercifully, they moved off, their figures swallowed by the trees. Mikey and I stayed put, too terrified to budge, until the forest was silent again, the only sound our own shaky breaths. "We need to find Tommy and Jake," I whispered, my voice trembling. Mikey nodded, his cap askew, and we crawled out of the thicket, our clothes snagged and dirty. We wandered disoriented, the forest seeming to shift around us. The sun was lower now, the shadows longer, and our calls for our friends went unanswered. Panic set in, the weight of being lost pressing down on us. Just as I was about to suggest turning back, we stumbled into a clearing, an old, overgrown cemetery, its weathered tombstones tilted and moss-covered, a relic from some long-forgotten settlement. It was eerie, but it felt safer than the open woods. We ducked behind a large headstone, its inscription faded, and huddled there, catching our breath. That's when we heard it. Footsteps, heavy and deliberate, coming from the direction we fled. Mikey's eyes widened, and I peeked over the stone, my heart in my throat. It was a wiry man, alone now, moving to the trees with a slow, predatory gait. He was closer than before, his head turning as if he sensed us. I ducked down, pulling Mikey with me, and we pressed ourselves against the cold stone, barely daring to breathe. The footsteps grew louder, crunching on the forest floor, then stopped, so close I could hear the man's raspy breathing. My mind raced with images of being caught, of that knife, of no one knowing where we were. Minutes dragged on, each second a lifetime, until the footsteps retreated, fading into the distance. We stayed there, trembling, until the sky began to darken, the first stars appearing overhead. Eventually, we forced ourselves to move, clinging to the hope of finding our way out. By some miracle, we spotted a familiar trail, a path we'd taken on countless hikes, and followed it, our legs heavy with exhaustion and fear. The forest spat us out near the edge of town, the glow of streetlights a beacon of safety. We ran the rest of the way, not stopping until we reached Tommy's house, banging on the door until his mom answered, her face creasing with worry. Tommy and Jake were already there, sprawled on the couch, looking sheepish. They'd chickened out, they admitted, running home when the older boys got aggressive, leaving Mikey and me behind. I was furious, my hand shaking as I yelled at them, tears stinging my eyes. But the relief of being safe overpowered my anger. Tommy's mom called the police, and we told them everything. The older boys, the men, the knife, the cemetery. The officer listened, jotting notes, but his expression was skeptical, like he thought we'd exaggerated a kid's game gone wrong. They searched the forest the next day, but found nothing. No men, no knife, no sign of anyone. The older boys got a stern talking to, grounded for weeks, but that was it. Mikey and I never went back to those woods. Our adventures confined to safer places after that. The friendship with Tommy and Jake frayed, their betrayal a wound that never fully healed. I still think about that day, the men's voices, the glint of that knife, the terror of hiding in that cemetery. I don't know who they were or what they wanted, but I know we were lucky to get out. The forest, once a place of wonder, became a reminder of how quickly a game can turn into a nightmare, and how close we came to something we might not have escaped. My knuckles turned white as I gripped the steering wheel, my fingers aching from the tension. My eyes darted frantically between the rearview mirror and the endless ribbon of highways stretching out before me. For the last 3 hours, the same pair of headlights had been tailing me, never straying more than 2 car lengths behind. This wasn't just some oblivious tailgater hogging my bumper. No, something was deeply, unsettlingly wrong. It had all started as an ordinary cross-country drive. I'd left my small hometown in Oregon at the crack of dawn, the skies still bruised with the last traces of night. My plan was simple. Make it to my sister's place in Colorado by the following afternoon. The first few hours passed smoothly, almost pleasantly. I cruised down I-84, the rising sun climbing higher and casting long, dramatic shadows across the rugged landscape. The rolling hills and distant mountains felt like old friends, familiar and comforting, as I sang along to a playlist of road trip classics. Around noon, my stomach growled, and my legs begged for a break. I pulled into a rest stop, just one of those nondescript oases with a gas station, a vending machine, and a handful of picnic tables. That's when I first noticed a car, a dark blue sedan, maybe a Honda or Toyota, nothing remarkable. It sat parked a few spaces away, just another traveler's vehicle taking a breather. I barely gave it a second thought as I grabbed a sandwich from my cooler, wolfed it down, and stretched my legs with a quick walk around the lot. Refreshed, I hopped back into my car and hit the road again. An hour later, I glanced in my rearview mirror and felt a flicker of unease. That same blue sedan was behind me. It wasn't unusual on a long stretch of highway. Cars often leapfrog each other for miles. I shrugged it off, telling myself they were probably just headed in the same direction. But as the miles ticked by, that flicker of unease grew into a gnawing dread. No matter how I varied my speed, slowing to a crawl or pushing the speed limit, the blue car stayed glued to my tail. When I switched lanes, it followed, smooth and deliberate, like a shadow I couldn't shake. I craned my neck, trying to get a look at the driver, but the glare on their windshield was impenetrable, a shimmering shield that hid their face. Were they just an oblivious jerk who didn't understand personal space on the road? Or was something more sinister at play? By the time I crossed the state line into Idaho, my nerves were frayed to the breaking point. I sat hunched forward in my seat, my shoulders tense, my hands white-knuckling the wheel. My eyes flicked to the mirrors every few seconds. The blue car an unrelenting presence. The rational part of my brain tried to talk me down. Asterisk, maybe they're just going to the same place. Maybe it's a coincidence. Asterisk, but another voice, a primal, instinctual one, honed by millennia of survival, screamed that I was in danger. My heart pounded, my palms grew slick with sweat, and every mile felt like a step deeper into a trap. I ran through my options, each one feeling flimsier than the last. I could try to lose them, but the stretch of I-84 was desolate, with few exits or turnoffs to disappear into. Calling the police crossed my mind, but what would I say? Help, officer. Someone's been following me for hours, obeying traffic laws the whole time. They'd laugh me off the phone. So I kept driving, the blue car an ever-present shadow, a constant weight on my mind. As the afternoon wore on, my imagination spiraled. Was a serial killer stalking their next victim, biding their time until I pulled over somewhere isolated? A government agent tailing me for some shadowy reason I couldn't fathom? Or was I just losing it? My paranoia spinning a mundane coincidence into a full-blown conspiracy? The sun dipped lower, painting the sky in vivid oranges and pinks. Normally, I pulled over to snap a photo of the sunset, marveling at its beauty. Today, those lengthening shadows only deepened my fear, offering more places for threats to hide. When a faded green highway sign announced a gas station at the next exit, relief flooded through me so intensely I nearly cried. This was my chance. Maybe confront my pursuer, or at least to get a better look at them. My hands trembled as I flicked on my turn signal and eased onto the exit ramp, my heart hammering in my chest. The gas station came into view, a small, weathered building that looked like it had been standing since the Eisenhower era. A flickering neon open sign glowed in the grimy window, and a pair of ancient pumps stood like sentinels out front. It wasn't exactly welcoming, but it was the only sign of civilization for miles. I pulled up to one of the pumps, my pulse racing, and my heart leapt into my throat as the blue sedan glided in right behind me. It stopped so close I could have reached out and touched its hood from my back bumper. For a long moment, I sat frozen in my seat, the engine idling, my breath shallow. What now? I hadn't thought this far ahead. Confronting them suddenly seemed like the worst idea in the world. What if they were armed? What if they were unhinged? My mind raced, conjuring images of every true crime documentary I'd ever watched. A sharp rap on my driver's side window jolted me so violently I smacked my head on the roof of the car, a dull thud echoing in my skull. An older man stood outside, peering in at me. He wore a worn baseball cap and a faded flannel shirt, his weathered face etched with concern. "You all right there, miss?" he called through glass, his voice muffled but kind. "You've been sitting in here for a good 5 minutes." Had it really been that long? I must have zoned out, lost in my spiraling thoughts. Heat crept up my cheeks as embarrassment overtook my fear. I rolled down the window, forcing a shaky smile. "Sorry, I croaked, my throat dry. I'm fine, just a little tired from driving all day." The man, likely the station owner, nodded, his expression softening with sympathy. "Long haul, eh? Well, why don't you come inside and grab a coffee? Looks like you could use it." I glanced in my rearview mirror. The blue car was still there, its engine off, the driver hidden behind tinted glass. My stomach twisted, but an idea sparked. "Actually," I said, making a split-second decision, "do you mind if I use your restroom?" "Of course not. Come on in." He gestured toward the station, and I grabbed my phone and wallet, locking the car behind me as I followed him inside. My legs felt unsteady, like they might give out at any moment. The store was cluttered but clean, its shelves stocked with road trip essentials, chips, jerky, energy drinks, and a smattering of local souvenirs like keychains shaped like Idaho potatoes. A small coffee station sat in one corner, the pot giving off a rich, inviting aroma that made my empty stomach growl. Restrooms in the back, the owner said, pointing to a door marked, "Employees only. Help yourself to some coffee when you're done. On the house." I flashed a grateful smile, my nerves still jangling, and made my way to the tiny bathroom. Once inside, I leaned against the door, closing my eyes and taking several deep breaths to steady my racing heart. This was my chance. I could call for help, or at least let someone know where I was. With shaking hands, I pulled out my phone and dialed my sister's number. It rang once, twice, 3 times. "Come on, pick up," I muttered under my breath. On the 5th ring, her voicemail clicked on. I swore softly, "Damn it," and hung up without leaving a message. What would I even say? "Hey, I think I'm being followed by a creepy car, just FYI." I splashed cold water on my face. The shock of it grounded me slightly, and stared at my reflection in the spotty mirror. The woman looking back at me was a stranger, dark circles under her eyes, skin pale, expression wild and haunted. I barely recognized myself. "Get it together," I whispered fiercely, my voice trembling. "You're being ridiculous. There's a perfectly reasonable explanation for all of this." But even as I spoke the words, I didn't believe them. The dread in my gut told me otherwise. After using the bathroom and giving myself another mental pep talk, I emerged from the back. The store owner was behind the counter now, engrossed in a well-worn paperback novel. "Feel better?" he asked, glancing up as I approached. I nodded, managing a weak smile. "Much. Thank you." I hesitated, then added, "I think I will take you up on that coffee, if the offer still stands." "Help yourself," he said, waving toward the pot. As I poured myself a cup, the warm, bitter scent calming my nerves slightly, I decided to probe a little. "So, do you get many customers out here?" I asked casually, stirring in a packet of sugar. "Seems pretty quiet." The old man chuckled, setting his book down. "Oh, we get our fair share of travelers passing through. Been picking up lately with summer coming on. You heading somewhere special?" "Just visiting family in Colorado," I replied, sipping the coffee. It was surprisingly good, rich and strong. "Long drive, but worth it." He nodded sagely, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "Family's important. Gotta make time for 'em while you can." I hesitated, then took a chance. "Hey, you didn't happen to notice if anyone else came in after me, did you?" There was a car behind me at the pumps. The owner furrowed his brow, scratching his chin. "Can't say that I did. Place has been empty except for you." He peered out the window, squinting into the dusk. "Don't see any other cars out there now, neither." A chill ran down my spine, sharp and electric. I rushed to the window. Coffee SL0 sloshing over the rim of my cup and splattering on the floor. Sure enough, the parking lot was empty except for my car, its silver paint glinting faintly under the station's flickering lights. That's impossible," I stammered, my voice barely above a whisper. There was a blue sedan right behind me. I know there was. The old man gave me a concerned look, his bushy eyebrows knitting together. "You sure you're all right, miss? Maybe you ought to rest here a while before getting back on the road. I've got a cot in the back if you need a nap." I shook my head, unable to tear my eyes from the empty lot. "No, I should go. Thank you for the coffee." My voice sounded distant, like it belonged to someone else. I hurried out of the store, my mind reeling. Had I imagined the whole thing? Was I going crazy? The warm evening air did little to soothe me as I approached my car, my steps faltering. Then I saw it, a small white rectangle tucked under my windshield wiper, a business card. My hands trembled as I plucked it free, my breath catching in my throat. One side was blank, stark and unassuming. I turned it over slowly, dreading what I might find. In neat typed letters, it read, "Asterisk, you're not crazy. I've been following you. Drive safely. I'll see you soon." Asterisk. My legs gave out, and I sank to the cracked asphalt. The coffee cup slipping from my fingers and spilling across the ground in a dark, steaming puddle. In the distance, I heard the store owner calling out, his voice laced with worry, asking if I was okay. But all I could focus on was a card in my hand, its edges biting into my palm, and the bone-deep certainty that my nightmare was far from over. Somewhere out there, my pursuer was waiting, watching, biding their time. They'd be back. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long, sinister shadows across the empty parking lot, a cold realization settled over me. My journey had only just begun. The sharp snap of a twig sliced through the darkening forest, freezing me in place. My heart pounded against my ribs, each beat a frantic drum in the eerie silence. I strained my ears, trying to pinpoint the sound source. Was it just my imagination, or were those heavy footsteps crunching through the underbrush deliberate and close? A low, rumbling breath sent a shiver racing down my spine, chilling me to the core. I was no longer alone in these woods, and whatever was out there was drawing nearer with every passing second. 12 hours earlier, I'd been brimming with excitement, my heart light as our group set out for what was supposed to be a simple day hike through Glacier National Park. The morning air was crisp and invigorating, scented with the sharp tang of pine and the delicate sweetness of wildflowers. Shafts of golden sunlight pierced the canopy, dappling the forest floor with warm patches that seemed to dance with every gust of wind. Our guide, Mike, had gathered us at the trailhead, his weathered face serious as he issued a warning. "Remember, guys," he'd said, his voice carrying the weight of experience, "this is bear country. We need to stick together and make plenty of noise." We all nodded solemnly, but I don't think any of us truly believed we'd encounter a bear. To me, they were almost mythical, creatures you heard about in stories but never actually saw. For the first few hours, the hike was nothing short of magical. The trail wound through dense forests, their towering pines stretching toward the sky, and opened into meadows bursting with colorful wildflowers. Purples, yellows, and reds that seemed to glow in the sunlight. We crossed bubbling streams on narrow log bridges, the water sparkling like liquid crystal, and scrambled over massive boulders covered in lichen, their rough surfaces cool under our hands. I hung toward the back of the group, my new DSLR camera slung around my neck, pausing often to snap photos of the breathtaking scenery. At first, the others were patient with my frequent stops, smiling indulgently as I crouched to capture the perfect angle of a fern or a distant peak. But as the day wore on, I could sense their growing irritation. "Come on, Sarah." My friend Jess called back after what must have been my dozen photo break, her voice tinged with exasperation. "We're losing daylight. Just one more." I promised, dropping to one knee to frame a delicate purple flower peeking out from a crevice in a rock. The light was perfect, the composition just right. When I looked up again, the trail ahead was empty. I could still hear voices in the distance, laughter and chatter carried on the breeze, so I wasn't worried. I'd catch up in no time. Slinging my camera back over my shoulder, I hurried along the path, my boots crunching on the dirt. But when I rounded the next bend, I was met with a fork in the trail. Two paths diverged, one veering left, the other right. I hesitated, straining my ears for any sign of the group. Nothing but the soft trill of birdsong and the rustle of leaves in the breeze. Panic began to bubble in my chest, a tight, suffocating feeling, but I forced it down. "This is no time to lose your head. Sarah," I muttered to myself. "Think, which way were they gone?" The left fork looked more worn, the dirt packed and smooth from countless footsteps, so I decided it must be the main trail. I set off at a brisk pace, calling out every few minutes. "Hello? Guys, can anyone hear me?" My voice echoed through the trees, but only silence answered back. As the afternoon wore on, the reality of my situation sank like a stone in my gut. I was lost, truly completely lost, in the wilderness, the forest, which had seemed so welcoming and wondrous just hours ago, now felt oppressive, alien. Every shadow held the potential for danger. Every rustle in the underbrush was a possible threat. I tried to recall everything I'd ever learned about surviving in the wild. Stay put? No, that was for when you were a child. Keep moving downhill. But what if that took me farther from the trail? In the end, I decided to keep following the path I was on. It had to lead somewhere eventually, right? But as the sun sank lower, painting the forest in deep oranges and reds, doubt gnawed at me. What if this wasn't a real trail? What if I was just following some old game path, wandering deeper into the wilderness? The temperature dropped rapidly as darkness fell, the air turning sharp and biting. I zipped up my light jacket, cursing myself for not packing extra layers, food or water, anything useful. Some explorer I was turning out to be. Then I heard it, a long, mournful howl that echoed through the trees, chilling my blood. Wolves? Or worse, what if it was a bear? Mike's warning from that morning rang in my ears. This is bear country. I was alone, lost, and utterly unprepared. My pace quickened, my boots slipping on the uneven ground as I pushed forward, no longer care about staying on the path. My only goal was to put as much distance as possible between myself and that howl. Branches whipped at my face as I crashed through the underbrush, my breath coming in ragged gasps. In my panic, I wasn't watching where I was going. My foot caught on an exposed root, and the world tilted violently. I tumbled down a steep embankment, leaves and twigs scratching at my skin as I rolled, my camera bouncing painfully against my chest. When I finally came to a stop at the bottom, the wind had been knocked out of me. I lay there for a moment, dazed and aching, my lungs burning as I struggled to catch my breath. Slowly, I became aware of a new sound, the gurgle and splash of running water. Painfully, I pushed myself to a sitting position, wincing as every muscle screamed in protest. In the fading light, I could just make out a small creek, its silvery ribbon snaking through the dark forest. A spark of hope flared in my chest. Water meant civilization, didn't it? If I followed this creek, it had to lead to a road or a town eventually. Using a nearby tree for support, I hauled myself to my feet, biting back a cry as pain shot through my ankle. I definitely twisted in the fall, but I couldn't stay here. I had to keep moving. I limped along the creek bank, using my camera strap as a makeshift walking stick to steady myself. The forest was alive with night sounds now. The hoot of an owl, the rustle of small animals in the underbrush, the creak and groan of trees swaying in the wind. Each noise made me flinch, my imagination conjuring glowing eyes watching from the darkness. The moon rose, casting an eerie silver light through the canopy. It was just enough to illuminate the ground in front of me, preventing me from tripping too badly, but also created deep, impenetrable shadows that seemed to shift and move with every step. I don't know how long I'd been following the creek when I heard it again, the unmistakable snap of a twig underfoot. But it wasn't my foot that had caused it. I froze, hardly daring to breathe. There was again the crunch of leaves, the soft thud of a heavy footfall, and was that breathing? A low, guttural sound, too close for comfort. Slowly, I turned around, my eyes straining to penetrate the darkness. At first, I saw nothing but shadows. Then, a shape among the shadows seemed to move, and two pinpricks of light caught the moonlight. Eyes watching me. A scream built in my throat, but I choked it back. Mike's words echoed in my mind. Asterisk make noise. Scare away. Asterisk, but my voice had deserted me entirely. My throat tight with terror. The shape moved closer, resolving into a massive, shaggy form. A bear. It was really a bear. My mind raced, scrambling to recall what to do in a bear encounter. Play dead? No, that was for grizzlies. Fight back with what? I was armed with nothing but a camera and a twisted ankle. Run? Every instinct screamed at me to flee. But I knew that was the worst thing I could do. You can't outrun a bear, and running would only trigger its predatory instincts. So I stood there, trembling as the bear lumbered closer. It was so near now that I could smell its musky odor, hear the deep rumble of its breathing. Any second it would be on me. I squeezed my eyes shut, bracing for the attack. "Hey, bear, go on, get out of here." The shout shattered the silence, making me jump nearly out of my skin. Flashlight beams cut through the darkness, and suddenly, there were people all around me, voices, movement, chaos. The bear, startled by the noise and light, turned and crashed off into the underbrush, its heavy footsteps fading into the night. Sarah, oh thank God we found you." Jess's arms were around me, her voice thick with relief. I burst into tears, the tension of the last few hours spilling out in a flood. The rest of my hiking group was there, along with what looked like a search and rescue team. Their faces a mix of worry and exhaustion. Questions and exclamations overlapped as everyone talked at once. "Are you hurt? We've been searching for hours. What were you thinking, wandering off like that?" But all I could focus on was the retreating sound of the bear, its presence still lingering in my mind like a ghost. As the adrenaline began to fade, exhaustion hit me like a truck. I sagged against Jess, my legs threatening to give out. "Let's get you out of here," Mike said gently, supporting me on the other side. "I think you've had enough adventure for one day." As we made our way back to civilization, guided by the rescue team's lights and GPS, I couldn't help but glance back over my shoulder. The forest, which had seemed so menacing just moments ago, was once again still and peaceful in the moonlight. Somewhere out there, a bear was going about its nightly routine, likely already forgetting our brief encounter. But I knew I would never forget. The forest had shown me its beauty and its danger, its wonder and its wildness. In those heart-stopping moments, face to face with one of nature's most fearsome predators, I had discovered a strength in myself I never knew existed. The night wasn't over yet, and I still had a long hike ahead of me. But for the first time since I found myself alone in the woods, I felt a glimmer of excitement beneath the fear and exhaustion. I had a story to tell, a story of survival, of facing the unknown and coming out stronger, and I couldn't wait to share it. The old barn door creaked open, its rusty hinges groaning in protest, sending a shiver down my spine that had nothing to do with the cool night air. Moonlight spilled across the dusty floor, casting long, ghostly shadows that seemed to reach for me with spectral fingers. As I stepped inside, the unmistakable feeling of being watched prickled at the back of my neck, raising the hairs on my arms. I wasn't alone in here, and whatever was sharing this space with me didn't belong. It had all started 3 nights ago. I was just drifting off to sleep, the familiar creaks of the old farmhouse lulling me into a doze, when a noise from outside jolted me awake. At first, I dismissed it as the wind rattling the shutters, or maybe a raccoon rummaging through the trash cans. Living alone on a farm, miles from the nearest neighbor, tends to make you a light sleeper. It's not paranoia if there's actually something to worry about, right? But as I lay there in the darkness, straining my ears, I heard it again, a distinct thud, followed by what sounded like hushed voices, low and urgent. My heart kicked up a notch, thudding against my ribs. I did what any self-respecting farmer would do. I grabbed my shotgun from the rack by the door, its weight of cold comfort in my hands, and slipped on my boots. The yard was quiet when I stepped out onto the porch, the air heavy with the scent of dew-soaked grass and distant pine. Crickets chirped and an owl hooted somewhere in the woods, but otherwise, the night was still. I was about to head back inside, chalking the noise up to an overactive imagination, when I saw it. A brief flash of light from the direction of the barn, like the flicker of a flashlight being quickly switched off. My pulse quickened. I knew I'd turned off all the lights in the barn earlier that evening. Gripping the shotgun tighter, I made my way across the yard, my bare feet silent on the damp grass. As I drew closer, muffled sounds drifted from inside, not the usual nighttime rustles of restless livestock, but something unmistakably human. I pressed my ear to the weatherwood, hardly daring to breathe. "Told you this was a bad idea," a voice hissed, sharp with frustration. We should have kept driving. And sleepwear, another voice shot back, weary and strained. In the car again? My back can't take another night of that. Shoo! A third voice cut in, low and commanding. Keep it down. You want to wake up the whole damn farm. I'd heard enough. There were people in my barn. Trespassers, maybe fugitives. My mind raced through the possibilities, each one darker than the last. Were they thieves scoping out my equipment? Drifters looking for a place to crash? Or something worse? Should I confront them? Call the sheriff? I was outnumbered, and I had no idea if they were armed. In the end, caution won out. As quietly as I could, I retreated back to the house, locking the door behind me with a soft click. Sleep was impossible after that. I spent the rest of the night parked by the living room window, the shotgun across my lap, watching the barn for any sign of movement, aside from that one flash of light. Everything remained still and dark, the barn silhouette a hulking shadow against the starry sky. When dawn finally broke, painting the horizon in soft pinks and golds, I ventured out again, this time with the sun at my back and my faithful dog, Max, trotting at my side. The barn looked exactly as it always did. Old, a bit run down, but solidly familiar, its red paint peeling in places like sunburned skin. Had I imagined the whole thing? But as soon as I stepped inside, I knew something was off. It wasn't anything obvious at first glance, just small, subtle signs that set my nerves on edge. A rake I always hung on the wall was now leaning in a corner, its tines glinting in the morning light. The feed bags had been shifted slightly, their neat stack disrupted, and there, half hidden under a pile of old horse blankets, was an empty soda can that definitely hadn't been there the day before. "Hello," I called out, my voice echoing in the cavernous space. "Is anyone in here?" Silence answered, broken only by the soft cooing of pigeons in the rafters. Max sniffed around curiously, his tail wagging, but he didn't seem alarmed. Whoever had been here was long gone. I spent the next hour combing every inch of the barn, searching for clues. It wasn't until I climbed up to the hayloft that I found the real evidence. The loft had been my favorite hiding spot as a kid, a sanctuary where I'd escape chores and dream about life beyond the farm. Now, it looked like someone else had been using it as a refuge. Tucked behind a stack of hay bales was a threadbare sleeping bag, its fabric worn and stained. Next to it lay a backpack, some crumpled food wrappers, and a dog-eared paperback novel, its cover creased and faded. My first instinct was to call the sheriff. These people, whoever they were breaking the law, trespassing on my property, using my barn as their personal motel. But as I looked at their meager belongings, a twinge of something else stirred in my chest. Sympathy? Curiosity? I couldn't quite pin it down. In the end, I decided to hold off on involving the authorities. I told myself it was because I wanted more information before making a report, but deep down, I knew there was more to it. Part of me wanted to understand who these people were, and why they'd chosen my barn as their temporary home. So, for the next 2 nights, I kept watch. Sleep became a distant memory, my days fueled by coffee and nervous energy. I spent hours staring out the window at the barn, jumping at every shadow, every creak of the house settling. But the mysterious visitors didn't return. By the 3rd night, tonight, I was exhausted, my eyes gritty and my body heavy with fatigue. I'd just about convinced myself they were gone for good when I heard again. That same muffled thud that had started it all, unmistakable in the quiet night. Which brings me back to now, standing in the darkened barn, my heart pounding so loud I was sure it would give me away. The air was thick with the scent of hay and old wood, and the shadows seemed to pulse with a life of their own. "I know you're in here," I said, try and keep my voice steady, though it wavered slightly. "Come on out where I can see you." For a long moment, nothing happened. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the faint rustle of straw underfoot. Then, slowly, a head poked out from behind a stack of hay bales. It was a young woman, probably in her early 20s, with tangled hair and wary eyes that glinted in the moonlight. "We're sorry," she said softly, her voice trembling. "We didn't mean any harm. We'll leave right away." "We?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. Two more figures emerged from the shadows. A man about the same age as a woman, his posture tense, and an older man with graying hair and a weathered face that spoke of hard years. "Please," the older man said, stepping forward, his hands raised in a gesture of peace. "Don't call the police. We're not criminals, I swear. We've fallen on hard times." I studied them in the dim light, my grip on the shotgun loosening slightly. They didn't look dangerous, just tired, scared, and desperate, their clothes worn and their faces gaunt. "Why don't you come up to the house?" I heard myself say, the word surprising even me. "We can talk over some coffee." The relief on their faces was palpable, like a weight had been lifted from their shoulders. As we walked across the moonlit yard, the young woman fell into step beside me. "I'm Lisa," she said, her voice steadier now. "That's my boyfriend Mike and his dad, Frank. We lost our home a few months ago. We've been living in our car, trying to find work, but..." She trailed off, her eyes dropping to ground, but I could fill in the blanks. The economy had hit rural areas like ours hard, chewing up families and spitting them out with nowhere to go. Once inside, I busied myself making coffee, the familiar ritual grounding me as the rich aroma filled the kitchen. My unexpected guests sat awkwardly at the table, their hands clasped tightly, as if they were afraid I'd changed my mind and kicked them out. Max, ever the traitor, was already curled up at Frank's feet, his tail thumping happily against the floor. "So," I said, setting steaming mugs in front of each of them, "why don't you start at the beginning?" Over the next hour, their stories spilled out, raw and unfiltered. Frank had owned a small auto repair shop in a town about 100 miles from here. Business had been slow for years, but they'd been scraping by, making ends meet with grit and determination. Then the pandemic hit, and everything fell apart. Customers stopped coming. Bills piled up, and they lost the shop. The house followed soon after, repossessed by the bank. With nowhere else to go, they'd packed what they could into their old sedan and hit the road. "Now we've been moving from place to place," Mike explained, his voice heavy with exhaustion. "Picking up odd jobs where we can, sleeping in the car, or..." He gestured vaguely, his eyes flickering toward the barn. "Wherever we can find shelter. We saw your barn and thought it'd be safe for a night or two." I nodded, turning the empty coffee mug in my hands, its warmth seeping into my palms. I thought about my own struggles over the years, the bad harvest, the unexpected expenses that had nearly cost me the farm. If not for the help of neighbors and friends, I might have ended up in a similar situation, adrift and desperate. "Listen," I said, coming to a decision that felt both reckless and right. "I've got a spare room upstairs. It's not much, but it's got a bed and it's warm. Why don't you stay there for a few days while you figure out your next move?" The looks of shock and gratitude on their faces made my throat tighten. "We can't accept." Frank started to protest, his voice gruff, but I held up a hand to stop him. "You can and you will," I said firmly, a smile tugging at my lips. "On one condition, you help out around the farm while you're here. I could use an extra pair of hands. Or 3. They agreed eagerly, their eyes bright with a mix of hope and disbelief, as I showed them up to the spare room, pointing out the creaky floorboard to avoid and the quirks of the ancient radiator. I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. The mystery was solved, and in its place was something unexpected. A chance to help, to make a difference, to connect with people who needed it most. That night, as I lay in bed, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of other people moving about my house, the soft murmur of voices, the creak of a bed frame, I smiled to myself. The barn was just a barn again, no longer a source of fear and suspicion. My home, which had felt too big and empty for so long, was now filled with new possibilities. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. I knew there'd be questions to answer, arrangements to make, and the delicate task of keeping their presence quiet in a small town where gossip spread like wildfire. But for now, in this moment, I felt a sense of peace and purpose I hadn't experienced in years. Sometimes it seems the things that go bump in the night aren't monsters at all. Sometimes they're just people, lost, scared, and in need of a little kindness. And sometimes, in helping others, we end up helping ourselves most of all.